Today's topic is about writing a book series. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 unconventional tips for you about writing a series. Now, it seems to me that everywhere a new writer looks these days, someone is going to suggest that you write a series. There seems to be the underlying notion that if you can hook readers on a particular type of book, character, setting, plot line type, that you will be able to draw them in by a series. The truth is, it can be either fiction or nonfiction. Both lend themselves to series. Best-selling authors like David Baldacci and Michael Connelly are masters of writing series. And they're so good at it that their readers actually lie in wait to see when the next book is going to be published and purchase it before it's even published. But also, it's not just for fiction, as I said. What about nonfiction? Say you're a travel writer, for example. You might have an idea for a series of books about travel to different destinations based on certain kind of storyline, for example. That could be a series of nonfiction books, and there are many others. If you go online and you search for advice on writing a book series, you're going to find lots of it. And I have to tell you that much of it is written by people who've never actually written a series. It's written by people who give advice to writers. And much of it is the same. Much of it starts with the admonition that you should begin your writing project with the notion of writing a series. In other words, they suggest that before you write even a single book, that you plan out for it to be a series. I'm going to turn that advice on its head and take a view that is 180 degrees in the opposite direction. So let's start by making sure we're all on the same page about what a book series actually is. One of the things it isn't is just a number of books that are all written by the same author. That does not necessarily make it a series. The fact is that many very successful series writers have written a number of different kinds of series. For example, David Baldacci has written probably in excess of 10 different kinds of series with different characters and different kinds of plots. And there are different kinds of series as well. For example, nonfiction books are sometimes categorized by a publisher into a series. One of my books that was published by a large publisher in the UK was actually published as part of a series. Now, every book in that series actually happens to be written by a different person, but nevertheless, they call it a series. Here's the definition of a book series that I'm going to use today. A book series is a sequential group of books by the same author that share specific characteristics. Okay. So now you know that that's the kind of series we're talking about. Here are my 5 unconventional tips. Tip number 1, do not set out to write a series. No matter what anyone tells you, write one book and see how you feel and see how you think about it by the time you get to the end of that book. Could it be the beginning of a series? Well, if it is, the book will tell you. When I wrote The Year I Made 12 Dresses, I had no notion whatsoever of writing a series. But by the time I got to the end of that book, Charlotte Hudson, the main character of the book, kind of nudged me onward toward book number 2. And Cat's Cosmic Blues became the second book in the series, a prequel to The Year I Made 12 Dresses. I just kept listening to the characters as I came to the end of books and ended up with book 3 and book 4. Tip number 2, each book in the series should stand on its own as a book outside the series. Not all readers will find book number 1 and then go through the series in sequence. You need to tell enough of the story that went on before, but not too much, because one of those readers might take book number 3, enjoy it so much, and end up going back to book number 1. And they should be related to one another, but that reader shouldn't know everything that's in that story. Nor should you ignore the previous stories entirely. Well, for example, when I wrote The Inscrutable Life of Franny Phillips, which was book number 3 in the Almost But Not Quite True Stories, I had to write it so that a reader could become immersed in it without necessarily having read Cat's Cosmic Blues, which came before. On the other hand, It needs to be interesting enough so that the reader might go back and want to read those books that came before. Tip number 3, keep meticulous notes on backstory. Now I'm talking about fiction and nonfiction. If you're writing a fiction series, then obviously you're going to keep meticulous notes on the backstory of all the main characters who are going to recur from one book to the next. Sometimes you don't know who those are when you set out, but you need to keep adding to that backstory. If you are writing nonfiction series, then you need to keep notes about how you're going to write the series, how things are set up, the commonalities from one book to the next, and the stylistic things that will tie one book to the next one. Tip number 4, let each book lead you to the next one. When you're writing, you know that every paragraph must have a transition at the end of it that leads into the next paragraph. Each chapter must have a transition that leads to the next chapter. And just like that, the end of every book, or as you move through the book, and at the end in particular, that book must lead naturally into the next one. By the time you get to the end of a book, you might actually need to rewrite the ending of it before it's published when you realize that you're going to be publishing another book because the characters have told you that there's another story. Tip number 5, keep the material fresh by introducing something new in every book. Don't make each book same old, same old. Don't make the readers think that they've actually read this book before. For example, when I wrote Cat's Cosmic Blues, which was book number 2 in the series that I've written recently, the main character was a through line from one book to the other. And there were similarities in the way the books were written in terms of points of view. However, there were differences. There were differences in the way the chapters were headed. There were differences in the fact that in Cat's Cosmic Blues, it came with a Spotify playlist. And that Spotify playlist was based on the names of each of the chapters. Something new, something fresh, something different for the reader. When I wrote the 4th book in the series, Something I'm Supposed to Do, again, there was a through line of the major character that carried through from book 1, through book 2, through book 3. However, book 4 was a little bit different, a little bit fresh in that it was a book within a book. And the book within the book was able to introduce another series of characters that had never been known to the readers in the past. Again, something fresh, something new for the reader. Of course, there are lots of different kinds of series, as I mentioned before. There could be a series with an overarching plot, for example, the plot that carries from one book to the next. There are also series that are one plot per book. And then, of course, there are anthology series. An anthology series might only be loosely connected to one another because they are all set, for example, in the same place. The characters might not even be the same, but the setting carries through from one piece to another. I happen to think that it stretches the definition of a series a little when it's really an anthology. However, there are some people that refer to it that way. I once saw it written that a series is the feast that readers keep coming back to. And I would like to think that it's at least as much of a feast for the writer as it is for the reader. Have fun with your series. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat. And maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.